My name is Brian Hudson. I work for Juniper Networks, and what I'm going to be talking about today is how we can deal better with a multi-cloud world. And if we start off by talking a bit about how clouds work, I think most organizations now have some workloads in the cloud. Most organizations now are actually using some applications that they're actually getting delivered by a cloud. And this should make organizations start to think about, how does this affect my network? How does this affect my security of my organization with these connections? And if it's a situation where, as a large enterprise, in order for me to connect to my clouds, I have to adopt a new set of tools and I have to adopt a new set of processes, then the cost and effort's going to skyrocket in my organisation. And that's going to affect the performance of my IT, and it's going to affect the budget of my IT, and make things very difficult for them. So what you really want is that regardless of which cloud you connect to, whether a private or a variety of public clouds, it should be effortless, and it should become ubiquitous. And it shouldn't matter where the workload is residing. Whether the workload is residing in a public cloud or a private cloud shouldn't matter to you. And today I'm going to be talking about Juniper's Contrail Enterprise Multi-Cloud solution, which allows you to get a lot of the benefits of being involved with multiple clouds and having workloads moving between them. But it also allows you to simplify your management and have a consistent, coherent security policy. So if we talk about these cloud adoption and how it works, generally it works that most customers, they'll start moving into the cloud because they're looking at software as a service. So, for instance, they're going to Azure or Office 365 using those sort of Office applications. Or they might be using Salesforce for a CRM or something else. And then as they get a bit more confident with the cloud, they start using more and more complex applications. And then as part of that thing, as I'm getting more confident with the cloud, I start looking at all these different public cloud providers, and I start choosing which one I want to use. Not only from a technical point of view, but from a business risk point of view. So I might be in a scenario where I start using AWS for platform as a service. I may look at using some business applications on Azure, and I might start to use machine learning tools that are present on GCP. So as I'm using all these different tools in different clouds, I can get different advantages. And some of those advantages I might be taking might relate to things like I have to worry about sovereignty and compliance. And a specific public cloud provider may have a site in my country. Or I may be looking at resilience and wanting to balance out how my applications work and where they go. Or I may be looking at just to try and get more agility. I might find features on one cloud which I don't find on another, or a different way of those features are implemented that suits me, so I want to take the advantage of that. And of course I want the flexibility to be able to move between those clouds, different workloads, so that I'm not locked into that scenario of only using one vendor and that vendor being able to then dictate what I do. So if we break it down further, we've got these advantages with the cloud. Agility is probably the big one. I think when networks came out, cloud networks came out and people started looking to move to the cloud, the big story was, hey, we'll save a lot in CapEx. Well, actually, the resource may only cost cents, but those cents add up. So I think people have now worked out that, hey, you don't save a great deal in CapEx. But what you do gain is agility. The fact I can launch a service almost immediately makes a huge difference to my business. The fact that I can start to compete with what some other business, a competing business, has put out a service, I can quickly run up a service, or I can deal with increased demand through use of a public cloud. Obviously, that's an advantage. I can start to transform how my IT team work, because I can start to pull people off having to design infrastructure, build systems, create networks, do applications, because I've pushed it into the cloud. Security gets a bit better. okay, because cloud providers tend to know how to do security. But it doesn't remove all the problems. In fact, it creates some, because now I'm using multiple clouds perhaps. I've not only got to deal with my own infrastructure, I've got to deal with these other areas of infrastructure. And their security postures are going to be different to mine. And obviously I can do other things like drive innovation. I can start going, well, now I can start getting an operations team working with my development team, because it's smaller now, it's more flexible. And hopefully I can lower OPEX because I don't need to have as many operational people working in the system. But there are some drawbacks to how that all works. This sounds great, but how do I connect to those clouds? And they're all different clouds and different domains. How do I connect between a private cloud and various public clouds? How do I encrypt across those clouds? How do I manage those connections between them? How do I deal with the fact that in my own organisation, I've got multiple vendors for compute, I've got multiple vendors for storage, I've got multiple vendors for networking, I've got multiple vendors for security, and now I've got cloud vendors, and they do things their way. And each cloud vendor is different. How do I deal with that sort of scenario? And how do I get visibility? If I've now got workloads that yesterday were sitting in my private data center, and then now they've been moved into the public cloud, and maybe they're getting moved out and moved to another public cloud tomorrow, how do I know what that application is doing, where that traffic is? How do I possibly build a security posture on that? And security is the other thing. I've now not just got this island of security in my area, I'm having to manage the fact that I've got these interfaces with other clouds. And then possibly the biggest one of all as an issue is complexity, which I think Bosco mentioned in his talk. Complexity is the biggest issue facing the adoption of multiple clouds. So we've had complexity before in IT, and the way we've dealt with it in those times is we try and build it into domains. We reduce it down. We say in a network, we have the branch, we have the campus, we have the data center, we have a public cloud. Or we build it into the infrastructure. We have bare metal, we have VMs, we have Kubernetes. We're trying to restrict it down to areas we can control and understand. Because if we just look at the whole, it becomes very hard to understand because there's so much going on. So it's a good idea to a degree. But the problem starts to occur when I want to take up the benefits of cloud. And the big benefit, agility. Because now if I look at each of my domains, I find that each of those domains has their own operating process. Each of those domains has their own requirements for infrastructure. Each of those domains has their own security policies. And now I'm going, hang on, I want to move this workload and I need to do it in the next hour. Hang on, I've got to now rush around and try and pay this tax. The tax of having to reconfigure things, the tax of having to meet security requirements, the tax of having to reconfigure devices. It becomes a huge burden and in fact defeats the point of using multiple clouds because it's so hard for me to move between them. Then I get no agility. All I'm getting is I'm paying cents for all these resources that it's adding up because I can't really use them effectively. So I'm really just building multiple data centers and then somehow trying to manage those data centers. So from Juniper's point of view, we saw this. For those who don't know, Juniper's in nearly all the tier 1 service providers in the world. We're also in all the cloud providers of any size. So we saw this sort of issue, and we've come up with a solution called Contrail Enterprise Multicloud. And the Contrail bit, for those who may have heard of it before, yes, it is our software-defined networking solution, very widespread solution, used by some of the biggest customers in the world, very highly scalable, high-performance solution. And importantly, an open solution. And this is a really key point here. Yes, it uses open protocols, BGP, XMPP, but it also provides its source code and an open version, which is called Tungsten Fabric. And that's really important because there's a lot of solutions that are starting to sort of get in this sort of area, but they aren't able to do at the scale and with the completeness of this vision, but what they are is proprietary. And they say to you, this is how you do things, and this is the equipment you'll use, and this is what it'll do. What this is all about is addressing what you actually require. So it means I can use this to manage any cloud, private, public, VMware private cloud, any hardware or software, any workload effectively, bare metal, virtual machines, containers, and physical network devices. And when I say physical network devices, you note I'm not saying Juniper physical network devices, because one of the things that we understand is, unfortunately for us, not every network in the world is only running Juniper. So you need to be able to support Cisco routers, Arista switches, or other devices. You need to be able to support other firewall vendors. Well, that's what we're saying we're doing. And the third point there is any deployment. So we're not saying to you, hey, we've got this great solution, but it only works if you throw out all of your infrastructure, install ours, and then it'll be okay. What we're saying is, no, if it's a brownfield, you've already got existing infrastructure, yeah, we can work with that. And that's significant. So this isn't something that's dependent on our hardware or anything like that. This is something that can run your network today. And the way we can do that with Control Enterprise Multi-Cloud is because it's intent-based. Now, for those who don't know, intent-based networking, what we're doing is we're saying, you provide the what, and let the how be dealt with by CEM. So in other words, if I have a scenario where, if we look here, getting to public cloud, private clouds branch, I want to put out a policy onto my edge routers. Well, typically what you'd normally do, your operations staff going to log onto the CLI, use the vendor's GUI, configure the policy, hopefully get it so that it's all consistent, all the terms are different, so I need to know about each product, and I need to be able to translate it. What we're saying is, you say what you need to the control command, and then it will push out the appropriate configuration to those devices, whether it's doing it through netconf or some other means. It's going to be able to provide that to it. The way it does that, it defines each device as a role, and then it creates features on that role and delivers it that way. So you're removing that whole situation where you have to have these trained people who know about all these different products and are able to translate it. You're removing that. You're going to get a more consistent approach. You're going to reduce your operational hit. And so, as I said before, one of the biggest things that we think is important is bringing forward simplicity. Networks are too complex now, and really the key thing about this in the cloud is how important the networks become. Because network doesn't get much budget. Network's pretty low profile. A lot of CIOs, they barely know what it's about. But at the end of the day, if I've got a multi-cloud situation where I've got workloads in a variety of public clouds, I've got them in Azure, I've got them in Amazon, I've got them in Oracle, and I've got a private cloud, then in that scenario, if something goes wrong with the network, that's a huge catastrophe for me. So networks have suddenly become a lot more important. But they're really complex. I mean, look at this. This is OpenShift, Kubernetes, I've got different people running them, I'm running bare metal. It gets hard. So really, wouldn't it be better if I could have a control command, I could go on and I can put in what I need to do for the different devices or for the different configurations, and it will translate that for me. I could get visibility of all that connectivity. So I can see how I've connected up to a public cloud. I can see what I've done in that perspective. I can see what I'm doing in terms of configuring the switching underlay and provisioning the switching underlay, which CEM will do. I can see how it can provision the overlay, EVPN VXLAN to standard. how it can do that for me. I can see all that happening. I have visibility. I have analytics. I can see what's happening and I can get reporting on it. And I can see the security of it. So I can see what my security stance is. So let's talk about security. Because if you're going to talk about multi-cloud and how it works, security is probably the biggest issue you have. And security, not just for multi-cloud, but just generally, is becoming more and more difficult. Not just because there's a lot more rogue countries and organisations attacking you as you. It's more to do with the sheer complexity of how things are happening in your networks. For instance, nowadays I'm using my multi-cloud, so I've got AWS to configure. I'm using Azure. I've got Azure to configure. I've got Oracle to configure. I go to my private data center where I've got my homegrown applications, my legacy stuff, my bare metal servers. I've got to configure them. Maybe I'm running OpenStack. That's a secure. What's the policies I'm using there? I'm using Mesos. What's the properties am I going to have to deal with there? What are the requirements? I've got all these policies that are all different that I've got to get to work in a consistent way. How do I do that? It's just a sprawl. So I've got all these people working on them, barely understanding what they're doing. And part of that is because they can't really know what the application traffic is doing. They generally can't see it. So a developer may say, hey, my application does this. So often I've worked with developers and it's wrong what they say. So you have to do a lot of analysis, you have to build up a picture, and then, hey, that application that was in the private data center for the last 6 months, it's been someone that had to be moved into a public cloud because we've changed our policies. Well, does the traffic still work the same way? Does it still talk back to the same servers, or has something changed? And that's the whole point of this operational complexity. Things are getting so hard, it's easy to make mistakes or just give up. And of course, I'm still dealing with things like east-west traffic issues. So I need micro-segmentation now. So that adds to the complexity. I've now got micro-segmentation to worry about. And as far as incident response goes, how do I do that? Okay, so I've got an incident response policy, and that's for my private network and private cloud. And then I go, okay, now I'm going to have all these public clouds. Well, they've got their own incident response models. How does it fit in with that? And of course, the big thing is budget. And the thing with security is there's no budget for security until something goes wrong. And then there's a lot of money. So you're dealing with all those things. And the traditional way we've had of dealing with it is have a bloody big firewall. And I'll take an analogy here. So look there, and that's basically the barbarians at the gates of, say, Rome in history. Except for the geeks, I don't know what they were doing but everyone else was. And if we take a place like Istanbul in Turkey, well, it used to be called Constantinople. Bear with me in this analogy. So it used to be called Constantinople, and it was the head of the Roman Empire in the east for 1,000 years. There's huge fortifications around on three sides, had a sea on the back, on one side of it, had big chain-stop boats, impenetrable. Armies laid siege to it and could never break into it. Until 1453, when the Turks came in through the sewer and conquered the town, changed its name to Istanbul, did other things. The point being that no matter how big your firewalls are, no matter how many of these firewalls you have at the perimeter, you can't cover everything. You can't actually provide protection. And now I've got clouds that I'm connecting to, you can't maintain that approach. You have to look at things differently. And the first thing you really need to start doing, given your networks are now in different places, given you've got multiple data centers, is visualize it. You've got to see where the traffic goes. And in 20 years in security, I think the biggest thing I've learned is the most important thing, is seeing where the traffic is. Because if you don't see where the traffic is, what can you do? If you don't see where the traffic is, you can make two choices. One, you can put every security control you can think of and hope that that works. Or the alternative is you can do nothing. And generally people are in between the two, sort of partially getting stuff they don't understand, let's just hope that nothing goes wrong. Well, if if I use Contrail Security, which is part of Contrail Enterprise Multicloud, what I can suddenly do is I can see the flows of the network, of the traffic. I've moved a workload from public to private, DC. I can see where that traffic is. I can see in a tiered application how that traffic's working. I can see when a back channel is being opened. I can see when a user is initiating traffic. And if I can see it, then I can build up an idea of what I need, what security controls I need to put in. And I can start to apply those security controls. But then I run into that next problem, which is, well, I've got all these different firewalls owned by, and they're all different in how they interpret things. Well, let's go back to intent-based. Contrail Security brings consistent intent-based. So at the end of the day, if I looked at that policy sprawl I showed before, they're all the same policy, really. It's just because they're going in these different environments and different things, it becomes complex. So I simplified by just telling Contrail what I want and leaving the how to it. And the other thing about Contrail Enterprise Multicloud and Contrail Security is I can start to do it on more than just a firewall. Contrail runs in the hypervisor, so I can be doing it there for microsegmentation. Contrail can run on the smart NIC. I can actually do it on the NIC, network interface card. I can do it for bare metal servers. I can do it on the top on the switch they connect to. So I can prevent malicious activity there. And what it means is I can have this comprehensive security control set. So I'm protecting everything. I haven't just got a few firewalls at the perimeter and a couple of firewalls protecting my VMs. I'm actually dealing with every part of my infrastructure. And of course, as I said before, the visibility. If I've got visibility, then I can automatically get policies to be applied. If this traffic goes to this destination, stop it or redirect it, alert me. It means I'm really confident now in what's going on in my network. So we go back to sum up Contrail Enterprise Multicloud. In a multi-cloud, I get agility. When I'm going to multiple clouds, I'm able to do some sort of IT transformation. Maybe my security gets a wee bit better. Hopefully I save some bucks. And maybe I can start thinking about combining teams and becoming more nimble. But as I said, you've got those drawbacks. How do I connect? How do I do that to different clouds? How do I do encryption? How do I manage that? What do I do with all these different vendors? How do I make it coherent dealing with them? Do I have any visibility on what's going on? And what's happening with my security? And that's where we think Contrail Enterprise Multicloud solves that problem. Any platform, any cloud, any workload, any deployment, green or brownfield. It allows you to simplify management across all of your infrastructure, and importantly, it allows you to have a consistent security model. So, finally, I want to just talk a bit about our partnership with Red Hat. So we've been working with Red Hat for a few years now, and a lot of very successful opportunities. But I want to talk about two in particular things that Red Hat and Juniper offer. One is called Contrail Cloud. And the point of Contrail Cloud is, and I'll just say what it's built on Red Hat Linux, Red Hat Ceph Storage, Juniper's Contrail SDN, and Network Function Virtualization library from Juniper as well. And the idea is that a Tier 2 or Tier 3 service provider can get this, and if they want to operate a service using an NFV, they want to do load balance, they want to do WAN acceleration, whatever, they can actually offer that service straight away. The alternative is they build the infrastructure themselves, they load on an OS, they patch the OS, they get some storage working, they put on an SDN that they find somewhere, they get that to work, if it even supports NFV, some of them don't. Then they have to go through, find all the VNFs, virtual network functions, and they've got to then test them and certify them. Then, when I've done all that, I see if a customer will buy it. Well, what happens if the customer doesn't buy it? I've wasted all this time, I've wasted all this operational value to do this. So this is a great way for Tier 2 and Tier 3 service providers to actually move into this area of telco cloud with a very low hit. The other area is OpenShift. Now obviously Red Hat's OpenShift, their version of Kubernetes, it's a great tool and been used by a lot of organizations, but using Control as the CNI, you suddenly get a lot better in terms of your networking capabilities. I don't now have a flat network, I've got a tiered network, a hierarchical network. And with security, I added to that from Control, I can suddenly do things like have a DMZ for a customer, or have multi-tenancy in OpenShift. And if you want to see an example of this in action, then over at the Deloitte booth, they're actually demoing this. And this is stuff they built themselves with OpenShift and with Juniper's Control. They've built a solution that they're now selling to their customers and working with their customers on that enhances OpenShift and turns it into something that's extremely powerful. So that's all I've got time to talk to you about today. Control Enterprise Multicloud. I recommend you have a look at this. It's a really great way of transforming how you deal with multiple clouds and how you deal with the trend in businesses, and it is an inevitable trend of businesses moving to multiple clouds and having to move their infrastructure through that. We have a booth out there. I'll be at the booth and happy to answer questions then, or just talk about anything to do with Juniper. Thanks very much.